This is Joe Biden, the resident of the United States. On January 27th, Biden took a day trip to Springfield, Virginia to give a speech to the Steamfitters Local 602.
Please take a seat if you have one. I said that when I was seeking the nomination. I said, take a seat, everybody. And there wasn't a single chair in the place. I said, that Biden really is stupid. He doesn't know it.
Now, as the top senior political analyst on YouTube, an unfortunate part of my job is having to sit through all of Joe Biden's speeches and remarks. And I've heard Joe Biden tell this have a seat story numerous times. And as you can probably guess, the details are never quite consistent.
I don't know if any of you have any seats, but if you have a seat, please take them. I once said that when I first became president, and they said, Biden is so slow he doesn't realize there are no seats out here. I once said that in a big crowd, it was in the evening. I said, please sit down. And there were no seats, they were out in the football field. And the press pointed out, Biden's losing it.
So Biden claims before he became president or after he became president, who knows, that he told people to sit when they didn't actually have chairs and that the press wrote about it. Now, while that sounds plausible, I can't find a single news article or video reporting on this supposed incident. But I do remember when he told someone to stand up.
And I also am told that Chuck Graham, state senator's here. Chuck, stand up, Chuck. Let him see you. Oh, God love you. What am I talking about?
And while it is completely plausible that Biden once told a group of people to sit down at an event where there were no chairs, there's no proof to it. The closest to it that I can find is this speech that Biden gave in Poland in March 2022.
Please, if you have a seat, be seated. If you don't, come up on stage.
Now, I'm assuming that the crowd laughed because most of the attendees were standing. But to be fair, there were a couple seating areas at the event, and it's not like he said, everybody have a seat. With that said, the Poland speech happened in 2022, and he's been telling this story since at least 2021.
And there were no seats, they were out in the football field.
Furthermore, while he was in Poland, the press didn't mention Biden's take your seats line because they were all distracted by Biden's ad lib calling for the removal of Vladimir Putin and regime change in Russia.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
And even though there's no proof of the take a seat incident, Biden's going to continue to tell this tall tale anyway.
Take a seat if you have one. I was at a big rally not long ago, last year, and I said, everybody take a seat. And the press said, Biden's so stupid, didn't know they didn't have any chairs.
Joe Biden at a big rally. Yeah, he's definitely lying. Anyway, back in Springfield, Joe Biden, as he is wont to do, attempted to give a shout out to a very special audience member.
Where's Doug? Congressman. He's around here somewhere. Oh, there you are. Doug, thanks for the passport into town.
So who is Doug, you ask? Well, that would be Congressman Don Beyer. But for some reason, Biden thinks his name is Doug.
Doug and I have something in common. We both married way above our station. Way above our station.
So not only is Biden calling Don Doug, but he's insulting him publicly by saying that he married someone way out of his league. Biden can't remember Congressman Beyer's name, but he does remember that Don has a pretty wife.
Doug, I think you might have been with me when I invited the chairman of the board of the three major automobile companies in America on the South Lawn. Doug knows. Don, look, here's the deal.
Ooh, so close, but no cigar. And calling Don Doug wasn't Biden's only gaffe of the day.
But think about it, not a joke. Last year, we funded 700,000 major construction projects.
So Biden said that 700,000 major construction projects were funded last year, when it was actually 7,000. And it never occurred to him that maybe 700,000 sounded a little too high. Of course, it didn't stop the sheep from clapping.
700,000 all across America. By the end of this year, that's going to be more than 20,000 projects.
What an imbecile.
Major projects like the bridge between Kentucky and Ohio, the Brent Smith Bridge.
No, it's called the Brent Spence Bridge. And mind you, he's reading from a giant teleprompter and confuses Spence for Smith. Man, I don't know if I can take 6 more years of this.
I'm visiting Baltimore and New York. We're going to replace a 150-year-old tunnel, the Baltimore-Potomac Tunnel under the Potomac River.
So Biden is claiming that the BNP tunnel in Baltimore runs under the Potomac River, a river that is nowhere near Baltimore. For reference, here's a map of the tunnel's location. And not only does the BNP tunnel not run under the Potomac River, it doesn't run under any river.
Biden really is stupid.
Well, here's the deal. We put a cap, and it's now in effect as of January 1, of $2,000 a year on prescription drug costs for seniors, even if their drugs cost $10,000, $12,000, or $14,000 a year, as some cancer drugs do.
Now we've entered the lying dog-faced pony soldier part of the video, where Biden is claiming that a $2,000 a year cap on prescription drugs for seniors is in effect. But according to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, people with Medicare prescription drug coverage will benefit from a yearly cap on what they pay out of pocket for prescription drugs starting in 2025. So even though this policy doesn't take place for another 2 years, the sheep in the audience applaud anyway.
They pay no more than $2,000 a year. All last year I talked about how beginning January 1, you're going to have to pay more than $35 for your insulin.
What a moron. But remember that the $35 cap only applies to Medicare Part D insulin users. It doesn't apply to everyone. Kind of a small detail for Joe Biden to leave out.
Now I'm getting thousands of letters going, God, it happened. And look, you know, this ain't your father's Republican Party. This is a different breed of cat, as they say. They want to pass legislation to do the following things. I've been saying this, no one believed it until I start to introduce this stuff. They want to raise your gas prices.
Biden is referring to H.R. 187, also known as the Raise Your Gas Prices Act of 2023. I'm kidding, of course. There's no such legislation. House Republicans did, however, introduce a bill to limit the Biden administration's access to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. You see, the United States is producing less oil than it did pre-pandemic. But instead of encouraging more domestic oil production, Biden would rather steal it from a stockpile that is supposed to be used for wars and emergencies, and not for politically inconvenient high prices.
My administration took action to get oil onto the market and bring down prices. Now gas is down more than $1.70 from its peak.
But saying that prices are $1.70 lower because of Biden's actions is very, very misleading. Because according to a Treasury Department estimate, these releases, along with coordinated releases from international partners, have reduced gasoline prices by up to about 40 cents per gallon compared to what they would have been absent these drawdowns. Wow! Americans saved up to about 40 cents? Holy majoli! And now the SPR is at its lowest level since the 1980s. Gee, thanks, Joe Biden. And the reality is that House Republicans don't want to raise your gas prices. In fact, the legislation would allow Biden to remove oil from the SPR, but only on the condition that the Biden administration proportionately increases the amount of leases sold on federal lands for oil and gas production. And this will back Biden into a corner. If he wants to use the SPR for political purposes, he'll actually have to start oil and gas leasing on federal lands again, which of course would hurt him with Democrats. Womp womp.
They want to cut taxes for billionaires who pay virtually only 3% of their income now.
But according to a report by Biden's own White House, billionaires pay an average federal individual income tax rate of 8.2%. So again, he's f***ing lying.
3% they pay. You know, a babysitter pays more than that.
Babysitters? Really? I don't know a lot of babysitters that are filing tax returns.
You got to cut your they want to cut your Social Security and Medicare. No, this is the God's truth. It's almost unbelievable.
They want to cut your Social Security and Medicare. It's the God's truth. It's almost unbelievable.
And they want to impose this one I love. They want to impose a 30% national sales tax on everything from food, clothing, school supplies, housing, cars, a whole deal, 30%. No, you think I'm joking?
So Biden is referring to H.R. 25, the FairTax Act of 2023. What it would do is eliminate federal income tax and replace it with a national sales tax, which would equal 23% of the gross payments for the taxable property or service. Now, let's say that this carton of 1 dozen eggs costs $100. Kind of a bargain these days, I know. Now, does that mean that the federal government would add a 23% sales tax to that $100 and you would get $123? No, of course not, because that would be way too simple. The national sales tax would add roughly 30% to that $100, which means that these eggs are now $130. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a second, Andrew. You said it was a 23% sales tax. Well, technically, it is 23%, because when you subtract 23% from 130, it equals $100. It's similar to how your income is currently taxed. Let's say that your federal income tax rate is 23%, and after taxes, you took home $1,001 in your paycheck. That means your gross pay, i.e. pre-tax, would have been $1,300. Because when you subtract 23% from $1,300, you get $1,001. So basically, regular sales tax is an exclusive tax. The fair tax and income tax is an inclusive tax. So under the fair tax, the total price of these eggs would be $130. The actual eggs cost $100, and the inclusive 23% sales tax would be $30. You're zoning out, I know, I'm sorry. And if you're having trouble grasping the concept, it's not your fault, it's kind of convoluted. But with that said, I'm not advocating for, nor am I railing against, the idea of a fair tax, but there are some upsides to it. Registered families below a certain income level would get monthly and annual tax rebates, and tourists and the undocumented who don't pay federal taxes would now be paying federal taxes.
The reason they want to do that, they want to eliminate the income tax system.
Yes.
Because guess what?
What, Joe?
That's the only way that millionaires and billionaires have to pay any taxes.
But if there's a national sales tax on goods and services, then wouldn't that mean that millionaires and billionaires are paying taxes, when they buy things? Like everyone else, Joe?
Let's think before we...
The last 2 years of my administration, we cut the deficit by $1.7 trillion, the largest reduction in debt in American history. While doing all the things I just said, we paid for it all.
Bullshit, we paid for it all. Biden is a fucking liar. Last year, the government spent $6.27 trillion, but it only brought in $4.9 trillion, which means that the government spent $1.38 trillion that it didn't have.
Let me explain this. Look, under my predecessor, the last guy that was president, the deficit went up 4 years in a row, accounting for 40% of the entire 200 years of debt. You hear me? I misspoke. 25% of our country's entire debt.
During the Trump administration, $8.2 trillion was added to the national debt. But this is largely because of the recession and COVID spending. And if you compare all 4 fiscal years under Trump and compare it to Joe Biden's first fiscal year, you'll see that Biden has added $1.8 trillion to the national debt.
No president added more to the debt in 4 years than my president.
And Joe Biden has added more to the national debt during his first year than any other president during their first year. But Joe Biden will never say it, because that would require being honest for once. Anyway, that's it for now. Follow me on Twitter at Don't Walk Run, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. As always, thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time. If there is a next time.